Hey, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this exclusive part of Right Stuff. This is available only on YouTube. So if it's your first time listening, go ahead, click that subscribe button, and you will never miss a show. We have an exclusive content for you. I was talking today to Callen Clarke. He is going to share the concerto that he created with his book called Trace, and it's about these three little boys. One is Catholic, one is Muslim, and one is Jewish. It almost sounds like a joke from back in the day, but it's the first thing you think of when
That's
it's
happened to me. That's happened to me. I've said, hey, I'm writing this book. And they're like, is that a joke?
Right. The first thing, because everyone, at least pre-2000, would have heard the joke saying, Catholic priest, a rabbi, and whoever walked into a bar. That's what the jokes usually start off like. But no, it's not a joke. And it sounds like it is, but it isn't. And one thing that's really unique about Trace is this idea of innocence. Innocence is woven throughout the pages of this book. And tell me a little bit about how innocence is part of this story as well.
Well, innocence is part of the story because the novel I wrote before this was called The Muslim. And the Muslim is very not innocent. The Muslim is a very slice of life, brutally frank kind of book. Not brutal, but plenty of not innocent dialogue, if that makes sense. And
I can just interject here, just as someone who read The Muslim, it's such a good book because The Muslim really shatters Western ideas about a different culture. It shatters it. And by shattering it, you have an understanding of a different people group that is different from your own. And then you bring it all together under the guise of faith. And you bring it all together because our main character is dealing with a lot of anger in his life. Okay. And when he falls in love with someone he's not supposed to be in love with, lots of problems. So there's not a lot of innocence in the Muslim. It has nothing to do with him being Muslim as much as his lifestyle and everything. And so now, though, we're in a historical period, and this is during the last days of the Kingdom of Granada, and we have three little boys. One who is Catholic, one who's a Muslim, one who's Jewish, and they all meet. But the way they meet is depicted through the main character. Who's that main character?
Rui Diaz.
And Rui Diaz is a Spanish boy, and he has a very dynamic father who helps him and guides him along the way. But his guide isn't necessarily great. There are times where it's flat out wrong or morally gray. But Rui maintains his innocence throughout this story. And there's something for that I think a lot of readers will be appealed to.
Rui, I'm just going to give a little Easter egg here. Rui loses his innocence.
Yeah.
At the end of the third book, in the last part of the story, he loses. That's what happens at the end. So.
Yeah. And I know he's going to destroy me later.
No, that's not what I said.
I know that's not what you said, but I know that's what's going to happen. I am a writer too, Callen. I am. And you never know what's going to happen. And so for those of you, what we're alluding to, we just finished our episode that's on pjcmedia.net. Go ahead and listen to the whole thing, and you know what the joke is behind this little interlude with me and Callen here. But
can neither confirm or deny.
No, he's going to say that. It's like 2319 from Monsters, Inc. 2319, and just do that. But with this, you create a concerto, and the concerto actually was the inspiration for the book. So tell us a little bit about the concerto, because we're going to play just some excerpts from this musical piece, but tell us a little bit about it before.
So the idea for the story from the beginning was three friends in Granada before the fall. That was the idea. And so naturally, I'm a symphonic composer. I've written symphonies and concerti and tone poems and fantasias and so on. So naturally, the idea that suggested itself to me was three friends, three concertos. This is actually when I thought the book was going to be one book. The book wound up being big enough to be three books, and it got split up into three books. But really, it's one novel. In some ways, it's kind of like a great big giant 19th century novel, hopefully with better pacing. But anyway, three concertos. So naturally, the idea that suggested itself was, we'll just write a concerto about each character, right? So we'll have character one concerto, character two concerto, character three concerto. Just put their names in for the title of the concerti. But I thought, I don't want to be so schematic about that, because part of the whole thing of the book is that their experiences are shared. They share experiences. And in a sense, the three characters couldn't have their individual experiences without each other. So I kind of backed away from the idea of naming each concerto after a character, and I just changed it. So this is not Concerto Rui or Concerto Amir or Concerto Walid. This is Concerto Daro. And the Daro is a river that runs through Granada. A river runs through it. And to understand what is happening in the concerto, you have to read the book. I'm not going to give away what the concerto is about, except to say that the concerto relates to the book. And so it's not precisely or exclusively about any one character. It's sort of maybe mostly about a particular character, but not completely, if that makes sense.
So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and have you give like a brief description of the first excerpt, the second, third, so forth and so on, and have our listeners get a listen to. So tell us about the first part of this concerto.
The first bit you're going to hear is an excerpt from the end of the first movement. And here we're depicting the events and the context of something that happens in the book to one particular character. It's extremely tragic, great misery, suffering, confusion, loss of identity, loss of sanity, really. And that's kind of what's being depicted in this music. And the whole movement itself is quite long. I think it's like 15 minutes long. And it's very disjunct, too. The music will be going along and then it will suddenly stop. The other thing to say about this music is that it's a combination of string orchestra, Western string orchestra, and Middle Eastern instruments. I have a band called the Callen Clarke Ensemble, and I do this band with my daughters. My daughters all play Middle Eastern instruments as well. And we play music. I have albums coming out, including the Trace albums, where people will hear us playing music that's inspired by Middle Eastern civilization. So the concerto was written for 4 performers on Middle Eastern instruments plus string orchestra. So that's what you're going to be hearing. In this first excerpt, it's predominantly the orchestra that you're hearing. You may hear some drums, you might hear the oud, and you might hear the violin played in a Middle Eastern idiom as well.
So, dear listener, sit back and enjoy this excerpt from Concerto Dato. Now, listening to that, Colin, that was absolutely wonderful. It moved very well, and all those
Thank you.
emotions that you said was going to be in that particular piece were there. So really enjoy that. Now I want to go to the next excerpt that we're going to read. Now tell us about, not read, mercy, but the next excerpt we're going to hear. Tell us about that one.
This is an excerpt from the third movement. The second movement, by the way, these are not performances with a live orchestra. These are demos that I created for the premier orchestra to hear. I premiered it with a university orchestra here where I live in 2018. And I wanted them to hear kind of the sense of the piece, not just to be reading it from the page, but to have some kind of recording. This is pretty standard practice today for composers. So these are studio realizations. I'm using synthesizers to recreate the strings and so on. However, the solo instruments are live. They are us. Since I had all my instrumentalists handy, I just recorded them. So this second movement is called the Persian Garden. And this has to do with a scene that happens in the second book that's not part of this first book. And it just has to do with Persia. And when you read the second book, you'll understand that. But I just kind of want to leave that cryptic for now. But broadly speaking, this is Persian, Iranian, traditional influenced music.
And let's go ahead and have a listen. Absolutely phenomenal. I wish I can play music, Colin. I really do. All I can do is use the voice that God gave me because I can sing. But even then,
That's music, Parker.
it is true. That is music, and I can hold a note. But I'll never be an R&B singer. I'll never be an opera singer. It's just me. So I'll just be the singer.
You say that, I wish I could make music. I make music, but I still have that feeling. I have the same feeling you do. It never goes away. Even when you can make music of some sort, there's always music that you want to make that you haven't made yet.
I hear certain people who have this beautiful voice and they can just blow you away. There's a lady at my church who is classically trained, and every time she sings, you cry because she sounds so beautiful. And she's a first soprano, and I almost swear the glass will break in the church if she hits those high notes. And then here I come.
I play the oud, and I play the oud better now than I ever thought that I would. I've come so far on the oud, but there are players in the Arab world, and I hear them and I'm just like, oh my gosh. I mean, that is the oud. What I do is not the oud. That's the oud right there, so.
You probably go like, that's the
It reminds me of a story. One of my favorite rock guitarists, Steve Lukather, he's a huge fan of Alan Holdsworth, and who's considered to be, some people consider him the greatest in terms of virtuosity, the greatest guitar virtuoso of all time. And, the story is that Alan Holdsworth finished one of his concerts, came off stage. Steve Lukather was there, and Holdsworth said to Luke, he said, I just can't play at all. That just was so terrible. And Luke, being Luke, he was like, well, hell, man, why don't we just go all shoot ourselves? If you can't play, I mean, what am I, man? So.
If you have insecurities, and I must have
That's right. That's
something
right.
else. I love it.
There's always somebody better.
And I think that's a good thing. It's actually a good thing because it keeps us striving to try to be the best at what we can do. And it doesn't minimize.
Yeah. Vladimir Horowitz in the hospital on his deathbed, greatest classical pianist in the world. He was sitting there muttering, God, I wish I could be like that one guy.
Exactly. Right. And you're like, oh, okay, if you're doing that, then right. You just realize you do the best to your ability. That's why you just want to be good at whatever you're doing. Now, what's this third piece we're going to hear now?
Okay, this third piece, letting the cat out of the bag a little bit, I guess, but it's called Itanea. Itanea. People are going to read the book and they're going to see a character, Gitanella, and they're going to say, oh, Gitanella or Gitanella. It's Spanish pronunciation. It's super quirky from an English perspective, but it's Itanea. And this movement is called Itanea. And the irony of this movement is that this movement is very flowing and beautiful. I tried to write a beautiful, flowing, sensitive melody. And if you read the book and you meet Itanea in the course of the book, you'll be like, well, she's nothing like that. What in the world? But it has to do with a specific scene in book 2 where she does something very important for another character. So this is a little excerpt from Itanea.
Itanea, play the tune. That was phenomenal.
Thank you.
Again, I keep saying that word, but it's absolutely true. These musical pieces that we're listening to it's incredible to think they all come from you. You know what I mean? Like, in a good way though, Colin, in a very good way. I don't say like they're all coming from you. I'm not saying it like that. It's really cool that you can create these masterpieces, if you will. And the fact that your daughters help you, so there's a family element to that.
That flute, that's my daughter, Hope Clarke. And the violin, that was Faith Clarke, my daughter's. Elizabeth Clarke, actually, at the time, Lizzie wasn't playing with us in these concerti. But again, those are demos, and I'm going to rewrite it, and Lizzie will be in there. So yeah, my daughter's with me, absolutely.
Okay, I'm a little disappointed because you had Hope, you had Faith, and Elizabeth. It was supposed to be Charity. I'm just
Elizabeth Charity Barbara Clarke. That's her whole name.
Thank you. You're redeemed now. Okay. I love it. So now we have the final piece that we're going to showcase on this exclusive content here on Right Stuff. And tell us about it.
Yeah. So this is the finale of the Concerto d'Oro. And, I couldn't fit in the whole finale, but Concerto d'Oro ends on a hopeful note. Each of the three main characters of Trace, has a different fate at the end of book 3. And I wanted the 3 concerti to have 3 different endings. One of the concerti is going to end in a very sad, well, let's just say it, depressing. It's going to have a depressing ending, and it's just going to kind of fade away into nothing. And I wanted to do that because this is not a happy thing. It would be wrong for me to write music about the fall of Granada and have 3 triumphant concertos. That's just not right, because this was not the fall of Granada, to the extent that we sympathize with the Granadans, which I think we should. This was a tragedy, so it needs to sound like a tragedy. One of the concerti will have a sad ending. One of the concerti will have a bittersweet ending. It sounds happy, but it really isn't. And that has to do with the fate of another one of the 3 characters. And then one of the concerti needs to have a triumphant ending, an ending that says, even though this thing has happened, I'm going to go on. I'm not giving up. I'm not dead. I'm still alive. And I can go out into the world. And if I can survive this, I can survive anything. And that is how Concerto d'Oro ends. And that is the fate of the last of the 3. I mean, they're not in any particular order, but that's the remaining ending is this sort of triumph in spite of everything type of situation. And that's what we're going to hear a little bit of in this next excerpt.
So let's take a listen to the finale. And that is the end of what you shared with us so far with the concerto for the d'Oro concerto for the book Trace, which is a series of 3 young boys, Rui, Walid, and Amir, and their story in the last days of the Kingdom of Granada. And dear listener, I hope you enjoyed listening to that. As you look back over how much work you've put into this whole series, what are some of your lingering thoughts that you have about it, Colin?
I need to get this thing done. It's not done, and I got to get it done this year.
I know what it is too. Sometimes you look around and you say, I've been working on this particular project, whatever it is, dear listener. It doesn't have to be a book. It could be a house project. It could be a quilt. It doesn't matter. Just whatever project you're looking at and you say, I keep saying I'm going to do it and I need to go ahead and do it. Well, I got to tell you halfway a little bit of story here. So Trace was not done when we first started talk about the show. He had already written the first draft, but he was rewriting it. And in a good way, I said, okay, I'm going to interview you in May. Okay. And I told him that I'm going to interview you in May.
Well, tell him what happened. You just hit me up and you just said, I'm interviewing you in May. You didn't even mention the book. It was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's what it was. And that was after we started talking, but I'm interviewing you in May and you're like, oh, and so you got the spot and then you put on Facebook, I just need a book now.
That's right.
That was the funny part, dear listener. And I say that because sometimes you just need a little kick.
Yes.
Sometimes just a little, not a big kick, because I'm not going to hurt him, but just a little.
I just told myself that if I don't have a book ready for Parker when we do our interview in May, that's going to be an existential catastrophe. I just made you like, the judgment, the judge and jury.
And so he got it done, dear listener. He got it done. And when I read it again, I was just so pleased at how well he just really rounded out the story. The first draft was excellent, and he rounded it out very well in this new draft that you're going to be able to get online wherever books are sold. So go ahead, pick up your copy of Trace, and you're going to love the story of Rui, Waleed, and Amir. Callen, thank you so much for being with me for this exclusive content on Right Stuff. Really enjoyed having you.
Thank you, Parker. It's been great being here.
All right, dear listener, we'll see you again next time.